Can't believe it's almost November already. Today is October 28th, 2019. This is the regular meeting of the Honolulu Board of Water Supply. Going to items requiring board action, and we didn't have a quorum last month, unfortunately. So we do have two sets of minutes we have to approve. First and foremost, thanks for all the board members for attending and making time out of your schedules. The first set of minutes we have to approve is from August 26, 2019. I hope you've had a chance to review them, and if I could entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of August 26, 2019. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. All right, the minutes are approved of August 26. The next one is the minutes of September 23rd, 2019. And I hope you've all had a chance to review those as well. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Seconded. These are in regards to minutes on September 23rd, 2019. Is there any discussion, any corrections, amendments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. All right, the minutes of September 23rd, 2019 are also approved. The next item, item number 3, is in regards to some previous minutes that we had, specifically on January 28th, 2019, February 25th, and March 25th of this year. Regarding those minutes, there are some corrections that need to be made. The chair recognizes Deputy Manager Ellen Kitamura.
Good afternoon, Chair Andaya and board members. What I would like to do today is just go through some what we call housekeeping measures. These are recommended changes that we'd like to present to the board that we discovered upon a review of minutes that were previously approved. Specifically, it's revisions to the January 28, 2019, February 25th, 2019, and March 25th, 2019 board minutes. So the corrections are as follows. In the January 28, 2019 board minutes, the minutes incorrectly indicated that the board had approved the January 28, 2009 board minutes. The board did actually approve the December 17, 2018 board minutes. So on page 2, we're recommending that the minutes be amended as follows. As you can see, approval of minutes of the regular meeting held on December 17, 2018. Moving on to the February 25th, 2019 board minutes, we have a number. For Resolution 893, acceptance of gifts to the Board of Water Supply from various donors. The signature of the board chair and the voting box was missing from the minutes, so the board minutes will be amended as follows. The signature of the board chair is added to the resolution on page 5, and the voting box is added to the discussion section on page 6. Similarly, for Resolution 894, acceptance of gift from City Milk Company to support the annual Detect a Leak program. The signature of the board chair and the voting box was also missing. So the board minutes will be amended as follows. The signature of the board chair is added to the resolution on page 8, and the voting box is added to the discussion section on page 9. For item number 3, the date in the footer of the board minutes on page 10 to 30 was incorrectly dated as February 26, 2018, and will be revised as follows. The date in the footer for the board minutes on page 10 to 30 is changed to February 25, 2019. On pages 14 and 15, the same document was on both pages. So we are recommending that the board minutes be revised as follows. The document on page 15 is replaced with the document titled Cumulative Totals January 1st, 2018 to January 31st, 2019, as was reported at the February 25th board meeting. And lastly, the February 25th board meeting minutes were amended at the March 25th, 2019 board meeting. However, the voting box and on page 9 was incorrectly titled. So we are revising the minutes as follows, that the title in the voting box on page 39, approving the February 25th, 2019 board minutes, is changed to quotations, the minutes of the regular session board meeting on February 25th, 2019 were approved as amended at the March 25th, 2019 board minutes. Okay, lastly, the March 25th, 2019 board minutes, the February 25th board minutes that were amended at the March 25th, 2019 board meeting. The section title on page 2 did not indicate that the minutes were amended, so we are recommending that the board minutes be revised as follows. The section title is changed to Motion to Approve as Amended, and the voting box approving the amendment will be added to page 2. We do appreciate the board's consideration of these recommendations, and it is really to ensure that the minutes are certified and represent a true recording of what occurred at the board. So if there's any questions, I'm here to answer.
Members, any questions? Hearing none, may I entertain a motion to approve the revisions to the January 28th, February 25th, and March 25th, 2019 board meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. All right,
Thank you.
the motion is approved and minutes shall be revised. Moving on to the next topic. This is for the adoption of Resolution 904-2019 in regards to the acceptance of a gift from Hardware Hawaii, HH Holdings Incorporated, to support the annual Detect a Leak Week program.
Okay.
Chair recognizes Ms. Kathleen Pahinui.
Thank you, Chair, board members, managers. We recommend acceptance of the proposed gift to the Board of Water Supply from Hardware Hawaii. This gift of $515.50 will buy us 5,000 toilet leak detection dye tablets. Detect a Leak Week is one of the cornerstones of our educational program. Undetected leaks is one of the leading causes of a high water bill, and we'd like to continue bringing awareness to the public on this educational message.
All right, that's incredibly generous of them. May I have a motion to approve this resolution so we can accept the gift?
So moved.
Okay, moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Not. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. All right, the motion is passed. And
Thank
please
you.
express our
I most definitely will. Thank you, sir.
yous. All right, we're now going to move to some items for information here. First up today, we thought it would be great for the board to have a brief update on the economic and construction activity forecast for Oahu. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Carl Bonham of UHERO, who will be giving us the 2019 economic and construction activity forecast for Oahu.
Thank you. So you said brief, right? The good thing is that this presentation is not during lunch, so it won't ruin your appetite. As you can see from the title, this is actually the title of our most recent, our third quarter state update. The construction report came out right after that, and so the presentation has incorporated items from both and focuses a little bit more on Oahu. I wasn't used to having the split screen there. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the U.S. economy, mostly because of all the news about concerns about the possibility that the U.S. economy might be going into a recession. We aren't forecasting a recession for the U.S. economy. A slowdown, yes. So I'm just going to talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses briefly. We feel like most of the risks are to the downside. There are definitely still, the upside risk is we settle the trade war and consumers keep going, the stock market, well, we set a new record recently today, I think, and the concerns over weakening manufacturing and weakening investment go away, and we see a whole nother level of economic growth. That's the upside risk. The downside risk is basically the opposite of that. For Hawaii, the basic picture is one of extremely slow growth. And the weakest part of Hawaii is Oahu. The story is essentially one of really no more growth in tourism. Construction is probably the brightest spot in the overall Hawaii forecast. Job growth is largely over and has been for more than a year. So this is kind of a pessimistic outlook, one that sort of puts us right on the edge of do we tip into recession or do we keep sort of bouncing along at very, very low growth rates? So actually the summary is Hawaii is poised for several years of very weak growth. So I think some of the slides will sort of help make that. Oh, interesting. My forecast period, which is the pointer's not working. Maybe up here. Well, everything from 2020 on is being hidden by the light blue shaded area, and I don't think there's anything you can do to fix it. Oh, well, you can change the pointer, yeah. So I'll have to describe what the graph looks like over here. So the red dotted line, unfortunately, many of the graphs have
We
the
won't
same
hold you
feature.
to it.
Yeah.
So,
And we can see it on our copy.
okay. So thank you. So this is U.S. real GDP growth, and the reason I'm showing this is that as of 2019, we are relying even more in Hawaii on U.S. visitors than we have in the past, and the U.S. economy is really underpinning Hawaii's growth. The U.S. economy has been doing very well, despite some of the concerns. We saw a little surge in economic activity after the tax cuts. This bar that you can't see here is actually third quarter 2019. So you can see the first quarter was very strong, over 3% growth. The red dotted line is the average growth of the U.S. economy during this expansion. So it's been just a little, 2.3% is the average. And our forecast for the rest of the year is below average. So while we think the U.S. economy is going to continue to grow, it's definitely slowing down. It's slowing down primarily in the form of manufacturing activity has slowed significantly. Business investment has slowed dramatically. And those are both going to contribute to growth in the sub 2% range over the next few years. The thing that's holding the U.S. economy together is the consumer. The consumption makes up close to 2/3 of economic activity. This is consumer sentiment, which is an index that's done every single month. We'll probably get the October number tomorrow. And in August, we had the biggest drop that we've had in many, many years. It put us down at the lowest point since 2016. We've seen a slight increase in September. And what consumers are telling the surveyors, and many of these responses, many of them are unsolicited, but what they're worried about is actually tariffs and the trade war. And of course, they're also being influenced by all the news that we hear, concerns over volatility in the stock market and the bond market. What they're not concerned about yet is their current economic situation. It's more forward-looking. It's more about is the economy, what are the prospects for jobs going forward? What are the prospects for my income going forward? So it points to really less robust consumer growth going forward, but reasonably strong consumer activity for the next 6 months or so. And so given how much this matters for the US economy, this and the labor market are two things that are really pointing to continued economic growth for the US economy. The thing that has people worried is mostly financial markets. So this is the slide we have the quiz on at the end. So pay close attention, okay? So I'll try to give the 30-second explanation for why people are worried when the yield curve inverts. These two different lines are showing what are known as yield curve inversions. The yield curve is just a plot of different interest rates on government bonds. So the blue line, let's do the gold line first. The gold line is the difference between the 10-year Treasury bond yield and the 3-month Treasury bill yield. Right? So normally if you take out a loan for 10 years, you pay a higher interest rate than you do if you take out a loan for 3 months. But right now, if you look at the very end of this chart, if I can get the pointer to work, the 3-month interest rate is higher than the 10-year interest rate. And essentially what that is telling us is the bond market thinks that the interest rates on 3-month Treasury bills are going to be going down over for the foreseeable future. So they're high today, but they're going to be falling. And if you average them all up over 10 years, you'd get the 10-year yield. I don't know if that helps or not, but essentially the math tells us that we can effectively average up all of these short-term interest rates, and it's the same thing as holding a long-term interest rate. So it's just like when your average on your class score is higher today than you think it's going to be at the end of the semester, it must mean that you think your grades are going to fall as the semester goes on. Same thing with the yields on interest rates. So when those invert, if you look at these different episodes that are shaded gray, each one of these is a US recession. And notice that before the recession, and that's true anytime you see an area that's shaded gray in the slides, it's a recession in these graphs. So notice that the yields turn negative ahead of recessions. So when the yield curve inverted, people started talking about recessions. The 10-year, 2-year spread is just 10-year bond, 2-year Treasury note. Now that has inverted for a day or two. It hasn't inverted on a monthly average for this data. And that's a more reliable predictor of recessions. So while these could be predicting a recession, they would tend to predict a recession out 6 months, 12 months, even a year and a half. And normally the Federal Reserve is not cutting interest rates when the yield curve inverts. Normally the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates when the yield curve inverts. And that's part of why the bond market thinks rates are going to go down. Right now the Federal Reserve is cutting. In fact, they're going to be meeting this week and they're likely to cut again. So I guess the bottom line is that this is one indicator. The other indicators, housing starts, labor market, 3.5% unemployment rate, new claims for unemployment insurance are all pointing to continued U.S. economic growth. So as I said, we're not going to forecast a recession yet. I think it's premature. The light blue line here is the U.S. unemployment rate, which is at a level we haven't seen all the way back to the 1960s, 3.5% for the U.S. unemployment rate. Now, granted, the Hawaii unemployment rate is below that, but the Hawaii unemployment rate is almost always below the US rate, except for the horrible 90s, which you may remember. But the other thing is that the Hawaii unemployment rate has turned. It started going up again. So it bottomed out back in the very end of 2017, beginning of 2018, and it's risen almost 50 basis points. This is statewide data. It's risen almost 50 basis points, a half of 1 percentage point over the last year. Now, that might not seem like much. People always like to point to how low it is, but the direction of change is important, and why the unemployment rate got that low is even more important. You notice the tagline up here that the unemployment rate signals a weak Hawaii economy, and I'll show you in the next slide why. Oh, that one's really ugly. So the people who have the presentation, I think, have arrows that show, so I'll walk you through it. So why is our low unemployment rate a sign of a weak economy? Well, primarily, so the gold line here is population measured on the left axis, and this is statewide. The declines on Oahu have been larger. So statewide, population has declined for 2 years in a row. We don't have data yet for 2019. We have data for 2017 and 2018, the statewide population shrank by 0.3%. On Oahu, it fell by 0.6% each of those years. And the year before, it grew by 0.1%. So essentially, we've had no growth or falling growth in population for 3 years. And so that's this slight decline here. The light blue line is the labor force. And what this chart is supposed to show you is that the labor force, this is actually an arrow that has a greater slope than employment. So the labor force from 2017 to early 2018 was falling more rapidly than employment was. So total employment statewide has fallen for about, really since mid-2017. So almost 2 years in a row, total employment has been declining in the state. But the labor force fell faster because people were leaving, right? So we were seeing jobs go away, and also people retiring. They also leave the labor force. And if the labor force falls faster than employment, the unemployment rate goes down. So a falling unemployment rate is not always a good sign. And in fact, through mid-2018, it was a bad sign. Since then, the unemployment rate has been rising because labor force didn't fall as fast as employment. So the falling unemployment rate from late 2017 through 2018 was not a good sign. And the rising unemployment rate since then hasn't been a good sign either, because it's all associated with declining employment. Part of that, this is Oahu specific, part of that decline in employment is being driven, and this is particularly true on Oahu, by extremely weak visitor spending. So the blue line here, and there's no quirks that I need to explain, the blue line is the average number of visitors on Oahu on any given day. It's quarterly data. So we're talking about 120,000. So the blue line is measured on the left axis. So it's 110 to 120,000 people on average any given day. And notice that since basically we've been hitting new records for average daily census from 2015 through 2018, 2019. And in 2019, we will almost certainly break another record for the number of visitors who came to Oahu and the average number of people here on any given day. So when you drive in the Ala Moana area or anywhere on the North Shore or Kailua, you're running into, well, hopefully not running into, but you are coming across many, many visitors. But they aren't spending money. That's the problem, is that, so the gold line here, measured on the right axis in millions of dollars. So again, this is quarterly data. So this level right here is about $2 billion, right? So we're talking close to $8 billion annually. You add it all up, because this is spending per quarter. And this is measured in real dollars, so we take out the effects of inflation. And we're still below the level that we were back in 2013. It's basically been completely stagnant since 2013. Actually, it fell for 2 years. We've seen a little bit of recovery, and a lot of what's going on here, and actually if you compared this to a longer run picture, these are below record levels. So we saw stronger spending in the 90s than we're seeing today. So we've got lots and lots of people here, but they're not spending very much money. And there's a whole variety of reasons for that. I mean, some of them have been here 15 or 20 times, right? So when you've been here 20 times, then you shop at Walmart, right? And you buy Mai Tai mix, and you go to your Airbnb, and you mix your own drink, and you grill your own steaks on the lanai, right? And you don't go out to eat, and you don't go to Sea Life Park, and so some of it is just repeat visitors, but right now, in the very short term, a lot of it is foreign currency and economic factors, which I'll show you in the next slide. So this is, now I've switched to statewide, but the 2017, 2018, these are growth in inflation-adjusted spending by US visitors in blue, and the gold is basically everyone else, all the international visitors. And this is the first half of 2019. So international, after a extremely weak 2018, international visitor spending is down double digit. So why? Oh, and actually most of the international visitors are on Oahu, right? If you go to Maui, there's almost no international visitors. A few Canadians and a few Australians, but it's like 95% US visitors. So most of the international visitor traffic is on Oahu. So this issue is right at the fore of the weakness on Oahu. And I mean, you may have seen it's 3 or 4 weeks ago, duty free announcing big layoffs. And we're hearing about businesses, smaller businesses failing in Waikiki, businesses that cater to particularly Chinese. Right? We recently lost our last direct flight from Beijing. And Chinese visitors are hesitant to travel to the US. In fact, there are government messages in China saying, don't travel to the US, you risk getting shot or being hassled by officials. And so there's been a change in attitudes, but also a big piece of this is weakness in their currencies. So if you look at the Australian dollar, it's down double digits against the US dollar. And their economies are also weak. And this is all very, very much related to the trade wars. When you impose tariffs, when the US imposes tariffs on other countries, textbook economics says it's going to drive up the value of the dollar. And that's what we've seen, and we've seen most of the foreign currencies for the Asian economies outside of Japan really suffering. So an Australian visitor might be spending exactly the same amount of money that they spent in so Australian visitors come over and over and over, and if they're here for their second trip, they might spend exactly the same number of Australian dollars while they're here, but when you convert it into US dollars, it's 10% less than it was a year earlier. So if you budget in your own currency, which makes sense, we're going to see a reduction in spending. And the spending is what matters, right? Not the number. I mean, we just assume they stay home and mail us a check, but that doesn't work that way, unfortunately. I'm not sure I should say that on Olelo, but HSTA hasn't figured that one out. A new wrinkle that we spent a lot of time struggling with in our last few reports is the effects of Ordinance 1989, which 1989 essentially is aimed at making it easier for the city to enforce existing rules on short-term rentals. And so it's the Airbnb bill, if you will. And when the ordinance went into effect on August 1st, we saw a drop in Airbnb listings from close to 9,000 to close to 6,000. So from July to August, there was a drop in listings that was almost 30%. The blue line is Oahu Airbnb listings. Since then, we've seen some recovery, so there may have been some overreaction, but there's also seasonality in here. And when you look at, so the last data point here is the October, so essentially we're getting data that is scraped from the Airbnb website that tells us all of the listings. When you compare this October to last October, you're still talking about a drop from 8,000 to, this is about 6,600. So this is a large drop, and when you take into account, notice that the other islands are not seeing those drops. So there's sort of an additional piece of evidence that this is not caused by something other than the ordinance, right? The ordinance led to this drop as people were worried that they were going to be fined for listing their short-term rentals. Taking into account the fact that Airbnb is not the whole market, right? There's VRBO, there's HomeAway, and they're bigger than Airbnb. This led us to down, so the gold line was our forecast before the ordinance, the blue line is our forecast after the ordinance. This is the statewide forecast for average daily census. The Oahu drop is much bigger. Actually, the other islands benefit from this. If someone was planning on going to Oahu and they can't find a short-term rental that they want to stay in, and let's say they're coming with 15 of their closest friends and they can't afford to buy 7 hotel rooms, then they can still get a short-term rental on the Big Island or Maui. They go to another island, right? So that it's very complicated to figure out what the total impact will be, because we don't know how many of the visitors will switch to another island. And we've also seen changes where the city recently agreed to stop enforcing the ordinance for the Banyan while they're being sued by people who own units in the Banyan. I don't suspect that this will go on forever, but you never know. I mean, as the economic implications start to play out, the city may change the rules. And there's a whole nother level of enforcement that is in the ordinance for a year from now. And that's when the platforms are required to start providing the city with monthly reports on all of the rentals. So who's renting, when, how much, which would effectively give the city, assuming that this holds up in the courts, would effectively give the city all the information they need for complete enforcement. So those numbers that I showed you before for the Airbnb listings, those were all the listings. We also know how many we think are illegal, or at least outside of resort zones, and the vast majority of that decline was the ones outside of resort zones. But by no means did all of the ones that were outside of resort zones stop listing. So there's a possibility that we'll see even larger declines in. So how big is this? We estimated that this is close to 8% of the visitor plant on Oahu. If all the illegal units went away, I'm sorry, ignore that, I didn't say that. The drop that we've seen so far is almost 8% of the visitor plant on Oahu. So I'm painting a picture where visitor spending was already weak, and now we may compound that with enforcement of existing laws that make it harder for people to find a place to stay. And the weakness in visitor spending, now I've switched back to statewide, because we only do detailed Oahu forecasts once a year, right? So most of our forecasts are a statewide forecast. But you can see the decline in jobs, and that's measured on the left axis. So we're talking about a decline from 72,000 to about 70,000 jobs over a very short period of time, from the middle of 2018 through second quarter of 2019 in the retail space, which is consistent with the decline we've seen in visitor spending over a similar time period. And this is actually a slide that came from our construction report, and the title is essentially making the argument that if the retail sector is getting hurt by slower visitor spending and overall weak job growth and weak income growth statewide, so the rest of us are also potentially tightening our control over our wallets a little bit, that suggests that commercial development for retail is likely to be slow as well. The one thing I didn't mention is that with the restriction or the possibility of clamping down on short-term rentals, there's a huge amount of uncertainty as to what those effects are. One possibility is that we'll actually see more resort development, that we will see an acceleration of projects that were already planned. The other possibility is that people who previously owned short-term rentals in areas that are illegal, North Shore, Kailua, will sell those and buy condos in Waikiki where they're legal. So there's a lot of different things that you could see happen. In other areas, if you look at San Francisco, they implemented an ordinance, I think it was 2015, and they're a very similar size to Oahu, a similar number of listings. They saw a similar size drop, but then they permitted more units in designated areas, and they now have more listings of short-term rentals than they did before the ordinance. So it's unclear longer term what the total effects will be. Going back to construction a little bit more, well, that's interesting. This time the forecast period shifted the whole, that makes sense because the forecast came down, so FO is lower, RECAST. So this is just a picture of how much mortgage rates, how much long-term borrowing costs have come down. The gold, actually I guess it doesn't make sense because forecasts fell in the pre-easing period as well, but the gold part of that forecast was essentially back when everybody was really bullish on the US economy and we thought interest rates were going to be rising over time, and then really in late 2018, early 2019, all of that changed, and the long-term bond rates came down, mortgage rates have come down by a full 1 percentage points, and this makes a huge difference for affordability. It makes a huge difference for financing costs of all kinds, whether it's city borrowing or individuals borrowing to get into their first home or move up. And so essentially what we're seeing in the housing market is we're seeing two different things going on. Interest rates coming down very strongly, supporting affordability, but meanwhile, job and income growth are sort of stagnating. And so you really need income growth and job growth to sort of sustain momentum, but we get a short-term boost from the lower interest rates. We haven't seen much of an effect in Hawaii yet, so we're not seeing a big surge in sales activity. And actually, sales activity across the state has been declining. Home sales have been declining, inventories have been rising, and home prices have actually flattened out significantly. Nationwide, we are seeing increases in sales, increases in people taking out mortgages and acting to buy homes, but much less so in Hawaii. And these last couple of slides are really summaries of construction activity from our construction report. And essentially, I mentioned earlier that construction was really one of the bright spots. It's not a bright spot if you look at the hard data for current year. So for the first half of 2019, so this point right here. So we're adding up different components of construction activity. The blue shaded area is residential permits. And so if you look at that point right there, you can see it's a little bit lower than it was in 2018. This is 2019. And then if you look at The non-residential, you can see it's a little bit lower. You look at government, it's way lower. And you add them all up, the government contracts award, I'm sorry, the total amount of permitting plus government contracts. This is total permits to build, essentially, is down sharply from 2018. But so permitting is an incredibly volatile measure. So because each one of those permits could represent projects that range from 50 million to 350 or 400 million, all it takes is to move a project's permit issue date or contract awarded from December to January to lead to enormous swings in growth rates. And that's what we think is going on in 2019, that basically we had stuff that was permitted in 2018 that caused 2018 to be a little higher. So if you smooth all this out, which is actually what the next graph does, we're still below, so now I'm looking at the measured on the left axis, and I need to correct something. This is wrong. This is in millions of dollars. And because these are quarterly values. So we're talking about relatively stable activity, a little bit of a decline as we go through 2019, and our forecast is for recovery, and that's largely based on looking at the projects in the pipeline where we don't have a permit on them yet. So any of the towers that you see going up on, whether it's in Kaka'ako or on Kapiolani Boulevard, they almost all have a permit for their pad, right? For the initial work that's being done for some of the infrastructure, but the permit for the tower hasn't been issued. And the other factor that was leading to slowdown in permitting in 2019 was the fact that we weren't doing courtesy inspections anymore. So the city stopped doing courtesy inspections, which was essentially allowing builders to build their towers and get inspections as they went through the process. And then most of the permits for the towers actually show up. They're officially issued by DPP a couple of months before the tower's finished, right? Before the occupancy happens. And so the slowdown in courtesy inspections played a role here. But there's enough work in the pipeline, whether it's what's going on at Ho'opili, eventually Koa Ridge will actually start putting up houses, the various towers in the Ala Moana area, much less work on the neighbor islands, mostly on Oahu, that it leads us to really describe this as more of a plateau. The construction job count is here on the measure on the right in thousands, so we're looking at 2 or 3% more growth in construction jobs over the next 2 years before we start to see things taper off. Construction is much less pessimistic. Oh, good, you can't see it because so I'll have to change how I do my shading apparently, and before I come next year. So the blue bars are real income growth. The gold bars are job growth. And if you want to imagine what the rest of that chart looks like, it would hover right along this split screen. Very, very low, so 0.5% job growth at best. Actually, our forecast in our last report for 2019 was minus 0.1% job growth, so slight decline for statewide jobs this year, and income growth between 1% and 0.5%. So very, very weak growth for the next 2 or 3 years. And a blatant plug for our website where you could find much of this without the oddities, and our data portal where you can find hopefully just about any data you want. I'd be happy to answer questions if there's time, or I probably went over.
Members? Well, hearing none.
I have,
Not to you.
yeah, I have a question to Dr. Baum.
Carl's good.
Carl's good. All right. Given the interest rates for bond, it's actually a good time to still go to market to sell bonds to finance capital projects.
For capital, actually, that's something we've been talking about a fair amount with respect to overall government projects. It's hard to imagine an infrastructure project that doesn't have a return on investment that's well above the cost of borrowing right now. And given our needs statewide across a whole variety of fronts, yes, yeah, I mean, now we may see lower borrowing costs in a year or so, right? So if we go into, if the US goes into recession, it's very possible that costs will go down. But rates are very aggressively low right now.
Thank you. Mary, you have a question?
I wonder if you could speak to the impact or role, impact of REP and then the transit-oriented development.
So, so most of what we're looking at in our construction forecast is, so rail is not having a large impact in terms of growth, right? Because if you think about, so imagine if you're not building anything and then you start at the beginning of the building boom, say Kakako and rail all start at the same time, but then you put up one tower every single year for the rest of your life, right? And it always costs the same. Then it's contributing to the high level of activity. But it's not adding to growth, right? Because unless you stop and start again, which unfortunately we've done a fair amount of, but if you just, start adding 200 or 300 or 400 million to your spending and you keep it steady forever, then it's contributing to keeping people employed and keeping the pipeline full, but it's not adding to additional growth. And that's part of why we think we're seeing some of the stability in, so we're describing construction as sort of a plateau. And that's a good place to be, because the alternative that we've seen in the past is boom bust. And we're not really expecting that, because there's this pipeline of residential building, tower building, and continued, it's not just rail, it's government projects in general, right? In our construction report, we talked about the Blaisdell, the stadium, OCCC, the airport work is very significant and is ongoing. On the flip side, the concern with rail, we really don't know how things are going to play out as we get into town and start to confront the really challenging part. With the other projects, the other government projects, we're a little more cautious in the sense of funding. If the state economy slows down significantly, if tax revenue starts to grow more slowly or not at all, there is a tendency to pull back on CIP, even though that might be the best time to do it, right? If costs go down, if people are on the bench, it gets cheaper, but it's really hard for state government to act that way. And so we're cautiously optimistic about those projects, but we all know they can face delays, as with rail. So the TOD, it's not clear to me that what we're seeing in the Kapiolani corridor is really TOD. It's really the project's pencil, and they don't in a lot of other places, right? Now, we do have TOD rules that help with that, but you don't need a train to make the Kapiolani corridor transportation. In other words, you don't have to have a train to get from Kapiolani to downtown. Yeah, exactly. So, I'm not sure it's really about transportation. But the rules in play, the densities and things like that definitely matter.
The incentives, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So board, we are subscribing to UHERO and to keep track of economic projections over time. So our intention is to actually bring Dr. Bonham back annually to present like this to the board.
Yeah, I think it's would be a great idea. You know, as an agency, we make policy decisions, and it's great. You know, it's better not to make them in a vacuum. It's always better to know the bigger picture and see what else is going on. This is especially on my mind as we consider water rates and water systems facilities charges and hookup charges. So thank you very much, Dr. Crum.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bonham.
All right, next on the agenda is a presentation of disaster preparation video, and it's been gifted to us via Board Resolution 898, 2019. And for that presentation, Chair recognizes Ms. Kathleen Pahinui.
Back in June, we came before the board, and we were gifted with about an $18,000 video project. And so we decided, after a conversation with the manager, to do something on disaster prep. And this has actually been on our wish list for quite a while. And so we decided to make a simple disaster prep video that's kind of evergreen and that we'll be able to run hopefully for a very long time, like we do with most of our spots. So what we wanted to do today was share the spot with you, just so you can see it. We will start this out on social media. We'll get it up on our website. And then next year, when we plan for our annual media buy, we're going to work this into our regular ad rotation during the hurricane season between June and November. So unfortunately, the two gentlemen who produced this for us, Saxon Sawai and Pavel Nakowski, were supposed to be here today, and they send their apologies, but they got called up for a pilot for a new TV show or something, and I understand work always comes first, so not a problem. But again, I just wanted to give them a little bit of a shout out for doing this. So I will go ahead and play this for you.
Meet the Lee family. The Lee family enjoys living in Hawaii. June to November is hurricane season in Hawaii. In times like this, it's easy to panic. The Lee family is smart. They don't panic. They are prepared. They know you can use household containers to safely store tap water for up to 30 days. You need to disinfect the water with 1 drop of household bleach per gallon. And let's not forget, avoiding store-bottled water saves our beautiful planet.
Very simple, but a little bit of humor like we always like to use in all of our spots, but just kind of getting that message out there, just how to prepare and save for disaster. Any questions?
Is that a real family?
No. Actually, Saxon is the father in that one, the guy that did that. And he is the nephew of our former, one of our water resources who headed up our conservation, used to work for Barry.
Our engineers,
Yeah.
Katsawai. And we really appreciate them for this PSA that we'll use every year at hurricane season.
Forever.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, moving right along here, the next item is the update on the 2018 to 2022 Board of Water Supply Strategic Plan and Water Master Plan. And here to present some performance metrics so we can take a look at where we are and how successful we have been or not in achieving those goals that we set forth is Deputy Manager Ellen Kitamura.
Good afternoon, Chair and I, board member. So hard to follow something like that. Hopefully put you in a good mood for our metrics update. So this is our annual update on performance metrics for our BWS strategic plan and water master plan. As you can see here, for the strategic plan, we identified 9 metrics. The water master plan, we identified 33 metrics, and I do have an asterisk over there regarding a pending result. I'll explain more about that later. And this gives you a high-level snapshot of how we're doing. For the strategic plan, 6 are on track. 1, we've missed our goal by less than 10%, and 2 were over 10%. And I'll be going through the metrics that we need to improve on. So the water master plan, 19 we've met. 4, we missed our goal by 10% or less, and 10 more than 10%. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the strategic plan first. This gives you all of the 9 as a high-level snapshot. I am going to concentrate on the ones that you see in red and yellow. First, talk about the employee departure rate. So the employee departure rate is the number of regular employees that leave the board voluntarily, involuntarily, or by retirement. This has been one of our most challenging goals. However, as you can see here, trend-wise, with the graph, we actually have been making improvements. So our departure rate, even though we did not meet our goal, we missed our goal by 10%, we're able to reduce it by 2%. So it was 10% last fiscal, it's down to 8% this fiscal. We had a slight reduction in the employee departure, but also an increase in hiring. And this is due, we believe that we have a fairly robust apprenticeship program in our field operations, very extensive. And then we've been leveraging internship programs. We also have increased our presence thanks to the hard work by our communications office of social media. Our HR people have been attending a number of job fairs, college and high school visits, and I did mention about the internship program. So we work with the college, and I know of the College of Engineering, where we go out and try to recruit juniors and seniors to see if they'd be interested in working at the Board of Water Supply. In certain instances, we have been able to hire them once they graduate. The other internship program that we're very active in is the Po'okela program. And this is actually put on by the city and county. And what they do is they get college graduates, college students, and offer them in a range of disciplines, work within the city and county. So we've been leveraging that quite a bit and have had some Po'okela students continue on at the Board of Water Supply. So we pay, the city pays for their first semester, and then the Board of Water Supply pays for after that. So it's a wonderful opportunity to expose students who really may not know anything about the Board of Water Supply to things that we do here in our agency. We've also been trying to educate a lot of our internal employees of what the internal promotional opportunities are. And this can range from moving from field operations into, say, investigations or inspection, which they may not have been aware of. So we've been doing that. And also some internal training curriculums to encourage succession planning. So there's been a number of things that we've been trying within the organization over the past year, and then I believe we've seen some success in that. Okay, so the next goal that we missed by 10% is our pipeline leak detection. And the main reason for that is that the leak detection team was tasked last year to do some special projects. So they're targeting areas that we're concerned about, wanted to do more in-depth leak detection work. So they're not able to perform the routine pipeline leak detection work that Mike Fuki reports on as part of his main break report. However, and we also did have some vacancies. However, we are taking steps to do reorganization increasing staff to take care of the special projects as well as the routine work. So we're hoping next year this will look better. Okay, the last metric that we missed by less than 10% is, this should look somewhat familiar to you. It's our main break. Now, this graph here is the metrics that we're looking at. It's the main break average of 100 miles of pipe, and it's remained fairly stable, 16. And the graph below here gives you the total amount of our annual main break, which actually was fairly stable too. What I wanted to point out is this, this graph that we show as part of our water master plan, that through our infrastructure or pipe replacement program, the line here, the blue line here, is a projection. If we didn't do anything, what would happen with the main breaks? And this is a modeling program for prediction of main breaks. With the current projects that we have now, the program that we intend to increase our pipe replacement within 10 years to 21 miles of pipe. The prediction is this orange line that you see here. And the green is our actual main break scorecard. So it's tracking fairly well. And then the one thing that's important in here is we do have a plan. It's going to take a while, but by looking at the performance metrics annually, it'll be able to tell us how good we're doing. So yes, in this case, we haven't met our goals, but we realize that it's going to take a while. Okay, so I want to move on to the water master plan metrics. So what we did was, when we did developed the Board of Water strategic plan, we identified 6 primary steps that provide water from the source to the tap. And as you can see from the icons up here, sustain, capture, treat, move, store, and deliver. What the Water Master Plan did is take these categories and determine performance metrics in each of these categories to help monitor and maintain the health of the water system. So these are the metrics that I'm going to be reporting again today, and they're really used to target areas of opportunity for improvement. Okay, so in the first category, sustain, these are the metrics that were identified, and the metrics that you see that we are not meeting our targets are mainly in the programs that are currently under development. We're still we still continue to fund appropriate programs that we've identified to protect our watersheds and encourage water conservation, like our rain barrel and rebate program. So this is one that it's a growing program, and we expect to see improvements in future years. Okay, in the capture category, we're doing very well. So we've met all of our metrics. As well as in the treat category, we have also met all of our metrics. Now, in the move category, there are 2 metrics that we are tracking and need to improve on: pumps available for use and emergency power. So the pumps available for use, this metric measures the percentage of pumps that are available to be put into service. So the current trend is actually showing that we are improving. We're putting more and more of our pumps into service. Right now, we currently have 63 out of our 384 pumps that are out of service. Both water systems operation and capital projects have ongoing projects to put these back into service, and we're expecting to see improvement as we go along. So for the emergency power, okay, I have a slide here. This metric is one that we're also trying to meet. It is installing permanent generators. As you can see around the island, these are the ones that are shown in red. We have mobile generators, 7 that are owned, 1 that are rental, that is kind of distributed throughout the island. As we install all of these permanent generators, then we'll be able to redeploy some of these mobile generators to other areas of the island that we have in need. So this is one area that we're also hoping to improve on. The Baratania station in green here, reason why it's still under construction, but in the event that we need to put it into service, it is available. Unlike the ones that are in red, which are still currently under construction. Okay, for the storage, these are pressure zones that our current storage does not meet our water system standards. And it is one that also will take a while for us to meet our goal, because we need to construct and install new reservoirs. So we have not been, we have 3 reservoirs that are in design or plan to be in construction. Once those are put into service, we actually will see an improvement in this category. Okay, the last category is deliver. And we talked about the main breaks, pipe main breaks before. So this is something that's also been identified in the Water Master Plan metrics that we want to track, and these are connected to our main break report. So I've talked about that previously. The high-risk pipelines, when the Water Master Plan was first developed, one of the infrastructure analysis that was done was what are the high-risk pipelines. So we are in the process of redoing the analysis, and for that reason, it's remained consistent. However, once the pipelines program is that's currently underway, we expect that when we reach those 21 miles of pipe installed, that it would be addressing the high-risk pipelines, because those are the pipelines that projects have been prioritized for design and construction. Okay, so these are the rest of the categories for the deliver. I'll talk about the pipeline repair and replacement a little later. The fire hydrant supply, now this is based on analysis that was done by our hydraulic model. The hydraulic model gets updated every, as far as like doing the analysis for this, every 5 years. So the last time it was done was in 2015. We're expecting to run the model again to see how well we've been doing as far as meeting our fire protection standards. Now, one of the things to point out is with our pipeline projects, we also improve our fire hydrant. That's something that we look at, fire protection in the area. So as we put in install our new pipelines, we're expecting this metric to improve. I already talked about the pipe leak detection. The pipeline wall assessment, so PWA. So this is a condition assessment of our most critical pipelines. So we have not, since we're undergoing a software upgrade, we haven't been doing the condition assessment, but we expect to do more work on this next year. Okay, so I saved the best for last, I'm hoping. So this is, gives you an indication of what Capital Projects is calling the road to 21. And it's essentially getting up to, in 10 years, 21 miles installed. So again, this is a long-term plan. The blue bars here show how much you would need to install in order to reach our target. The orange here is what was actually installed. So what we're keeping an eye on is to make sure that the orange lines track close to the blue lines. And as you can see here, they've been doing very well. You know, it's actually, in some cases it went over, but it's been pretty close to what's anticipated. So, yes.
Alan, real quick, on the 2019 numbers, Are those year-to-date, or is it, because there's 2 more
Those,
months?
those were what was installed in fiscal year 2019.
Oh, fiscal year,
Yeah.
which ended.
This is June 30th of this
Yeah,
year.
so as of
Okay.
June 30th last year, so this is
We're in
the total
fiscal year
number.
2020 right now.
Okay.
So is there any questions on this? Because I think this is one of the more important graphs that we have here, because it shows what the plan is, it shows how well we are as far as meeting the plan. And meeting this in 10 years, 21 miles, has great repercussions on mean breaks and all of the other metrics. So this is one of the graphs that we pay particular attention to. Okay, lastly, this is actually the tools that we have identified in the water master plan. This keeps us on track. So we don't forget about it. We are going to be updating the water master plan every 10 years. The hydraulic models and the risk model, which they call CAP plan, also updated every 5 years. GIS information is actually updated daily, but then they have an annual target. And the SCADA reliability, this is actually moving all of our SCADA onto a microwave backbone. So by 2023, the target is to have 100%. And this is another that we're kind of keeping an eye on to make sure that we reach our goal of 100% by 2023. So that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, happy to answer.
Members, any questions?
Okay, we're going to be doing this in October again, every year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you, Ellen.
All right, at this time, I will be, with the board's indulgence, I will be taking a matter out of order, and in fact, it's not on the agenda. I was hoping to wait. Do I need to? All right, so I was hoping we would be able to add it to the agenda. I have been advised, we need a 2/3 vote to add something on the agenda. And it's 2/3 of all board members, not just of those present. So that would be 5, we're still at 4. We're hoping to get one more who's on his way, but not quite here yet. So we're gonna just continue on our regular agenda until hopefully we can get another board member.
That's correct, Chair. Board Member Jay Butaya hopefully will be arriving in the near future to the board meeting.
Okay, good. Okay, so the next item is the financial update for the quarter that ended September 30th, 2019. Chair recognizes Mr. Joe Cooper.
Good afternoon, Chair Andaya, board members. This is the quarterly financial report for the first quarter of fiscal year 2020. So we're looking forward to an exciting fiscal year. Let's see. So far for the first 3 months of the year, our actual revenue was $66 million. This is $2 million over our budgeted revenue of $64 million. Our operating costs were $40 million, which is $9 million below our budgeted operating costs. And combining those two numbers give us an actual net revenue of $26 million, which is about $11 million over what we budgeted. So in general, our revenues and costs are pretty much in line with what they were in prior years. The revenue is up a little bit, and the budgeted costs are somewhat below budget. This is a breakdown of the cost drivers behind some of our operating costs. Personnel is $10 million, which is $2 million under budget. Materials, services, and supplies was $12 million, or $7 million under budget. Equipment was close to budget at $100,000. Debt service and utilities were both on budget at $4 million and $6 million respectively. Most of the material, services, and supply variance falls into professional services and other contractual services. Most of those are timing issues that either there's uncertainty as to when those costs will occur, or they're budgeted and we still expect to execute them later in the year. This graph kind of gives you a graphical version of our total operating costs as a percentages. Fixed costs, which includes things like utilities, case fees, retirement, and post-employment costs, is our largest category at about 32%, just under $13 million. Our second largest category, materials, services, and supplies, is 31%, or just over $12 million. Personnel services is our third largest category at 26%, followed by debt service at 11%, and equipment at basically at 0% is a small portion. Okay. This shows our the actual expenses compared to budgeted expenses for these different categories. And again, you can see that most areas are close, well, equipment, debt service, and fixed charges are on budget. Personnel services and material services and supplies are somewhat below budget. This shows our operating expenses both on a monthly basis and a year-to-date basis. On year-to-date, and I get to pick the pointer, is our expenses are about 18% below our budgeted expenses. The variance, again, as we discussed earlier, is primarily due to personnel vacancies and contracted services. This is, again, is our revenue on a month-to-month basis and year-to-date. Again, we're about just under 4% variance for our year-to-date budget, and which is about a little over $2 million over budget. Most of the monthly variance is due to different timing differences. And that concludes my report for the quarter. Are there any questions or comments?
Members? All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the report. Moving on to the next item is a status update of groundwater levels at all index stations. That will be presented by Mr. Barry Uskawa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. For September, we seem to have another glitch here. This was an important statement, but we ended up blanking it out. But no, really, no aquifer index wells in low groundwater status for September. The monthly production was 148 million gallons per day. Rainfall for September was 140% of normal, which kicked up the recharge and stuff. I don't quite remember the rainfall. I must have been stuck indoors, but it did. When you have high rainfall, it usually affects pumpage. But our pumpage at 148 is still above our 5-year monthly average for this time of year, so it's slightly above. But no real issues in terms of low groundwater, and we'll continue to monitor all the conditions. And that's my report.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the report. Any questions? None. Moving on. Item number 6, water main repair report for September 2019.
For the month of September, we had 43 main breaks, slightly down from the previous month of 57, which is still an all-time high in recent years. We are still investigating to look at possible root causes. We don't have a clear answer yet, but you can see a lot of main breaks are occurring in cast iron pipe on smaller diameters. Thank you, Barry. Keep on going. We did have a break on a concrete cylinder pipe in Waimanalo 20-inch diameter transmission main. 42 miles of pipeline was surveyed by the leak detection team for the month of September, but like Ellen mentioned during the performance metrics for the Water Master Plan, we have a number of vacancies or staff not at work on the leak detection team because of different issues. And we're working to try and increase the number of staff in the leak detection team. That's the report for this month. Mr. Fouquet will be back next month for the next month's report. I don't know if I've done a decent job as Mike. He usually does a great job.
All right, thank you, Manager Lau.
Thank you.
The final item on our agenda today is the Red Hill Bulk Fuel Facility update.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. Today I'd like to give an update on the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility. The Red Hill Administrative Order and Consent requires the Navy to do a number of different studies. One of those studies is to identify what is the tank upgrades for those tanks going forward. So today I'd like to kind of share with you what's in that particular tank upgrade alternative report. We'll again go and compare and contrast the Navy's reasons for their decision, as well as some of the data that we've been seeing to support or in contrast with that decision. And then from there, we'll kind of take a look at the current status of the Red Hills UST permit application with Department of Health, and then finally end with a review of the Fuel Tank Advisory Committee meeting that happened the other week. So there are a number of requirements as far as obtaining or selecting the tank upgrade. One of them, the Administrative Order and Consent, requires that the upgrade prevent releases to the environment. Secondly, the regulatory agencies have informed or notified the Navy that the upgrade needs to ensure that groundwater and drinking water resources are protected. And then finally, there is the Hawaii Revised Statutes that explicitly provides that underground fuel storage tank systems be operated to prevent releases for the entire operational life of that system. So about two years ago, the Navy did a study of different kinds of alternatives, and here they identified 6 different types, starting from 1A, which is the current one that they perform now, single wall, quarter-inch steel tank, steel liner, all the way to 3A, which is the tank within a tank, secondary containment with an interstitial space. In that report, the Navy identifies alternative 3A as something that can be constructed using practicable construction means and methods. The Navy also identified some cost differences among all of the different choices or options. Here, the advertiser did a great graphic showing all the different range of costs, starting from the existing tank within single wall tank all the way to a secondary containment. So the Navy actually, among all of these choices, selected their existing single wall tanks and their current practices as their decision or selection for the upgrade for Red Hill. They also discuss implementing what is called double wall equivalency, look at the feasibility of constructing a water treatment facility as well as implement other kinds of improvements. So their choice is that, again, single wall tank with quarter-inch steel liner that separates the fuel from the environment, and the bottom dome would be coated as they currently perform now. The Navy feels this particular choice is protective or provides the best level of environmental protection, and it also ensures that there's safe drinking water from the Red Hill aquifer for military families and Oahu neighbors today and tomorrow. Department of Health is currently accepting comments. Just today, they announced that there's a public hearing on the comments dated November 19th. It will be held at Wanalua Middle School from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. on November 19th. According to the Navy, as far as what is double wall equivalency, they're essentially saying that if you take the single wall tank as they currently operate now, and you combine that with all of the other measures, they are doing tank tightness testing, they're monitoring for the groundwater, they're monitoring soil vapor, petroleum in the soil. You take all of those and put those together, in their mind, it is equivalent to redundant elements of detection and capture equivalent to a double wall solution. The Navy is also looking at installing a water treatment plant and the feasibility of that plant to capture any kind of fuel and collect any kind of fuel that might release into the environment so that it doesn't impact drinking water sources nearby. Now, in terms of this double wall equivalency, the initial objective is to prevent releases from getting into the environment in the first place. So things like leak detection or looking at soil vapor monitoring is actually measuring what has already released into an environment. From our standpoint, that's not the same as a secondary containment tank within a tank. The concept of also this treatment plant also is something that currently doesn't exist and still hasn't been proved out as to whether the concept of the process will actually work. Now, there's some key assumptions with respect to how the Navy came to their choice. One of them is that the 2014 release was the only one that actually occurred. That release was as a result of poor workmanship rather than the facility itself, and that their current ability to look for places that need to be repaired is actually very, very reliable. And that finally, all of the different options would behave in the same way in the event of a catastrophic episode. We beg to differ. There's lots of Navy data that shows that 2014 wasn't the only release. Laboratory analysis of samples of the steel liner showed that the Navy's ability to actually find where they need to repair is actually 50% incorrect, and they over and actually underestimate the actual thickness or how much wall thickness is inside of the liner. The Navy's own consultant who did a risk analysis says that there is a probability of additional leaks coming into the future, as much as 27% chance of a release between 1,000 to 30,000 gallons, and that there's actually chronic releases that are currently ongoing that's actually undetected, that's occurring every year right now. The Department of Health did an evaluation on the groundwater model that the Navy put together, and they came to the similar conclusions that we did, that the Navy's model is unable to reproduce actual data that's being collected out or measured out in the field, and there's a component of groundwater that can actually move across the valley to our wells at Halawa Shaft. So this is kind of a picture of this, the Navy's kind of thought is that the groundwater is only moving from the mountain down to the sea. Halawa Shaft is up here. This is H3. The Navy's tanks are located here. And here's the Navy's water source called Red Hill Shaft. So all the water is moving here. When the shaft turns on, it draws any of the contamination. There would be a treatment plant here to treat any remaining contamination that's in the groundwater. But what's not taken into account that there is actual data that actually shows that groundwater can actually move across the valley. It was actually done as a part of pumping test that was done last year, and that at high rates of pumpage here at Halawa Shaft, we actually saw changes in water level as far as on the other side by Moanalua Valley. There are some analysis and work that's still not done yet. The Navy's model still needs to be reviewed. There's lots of disagreement with respect to the Navy's interpretation of the data being collected among many of the experts who look at all of the different areas, and those things still haven't been reconciled yet. Now, the groundwater aquifer that is concerned to us is part of a larger one called the Southern Oahu Basal Aquifer that was designated by EPA in 1987. This is a map that EPA provided that shows the area in which this is the actual area of the southern Oahu groundwater aquifer, starting from around Manoa Stream area all the way up to just north of by Whitmore Village and just after Makakilo. Now, as you know, the island is subdivided into many aquifer systems. All of these were set up to manage the water usage within each of these areas. These boundaries over here are not actual hard physical boundaries that separate water from one to the other. It is part of a total aquifer system that's all hydraulically connected. So if you zoom in to where Red Hill is located, it's actually on the border of the Waimalu and Moanulu aquifers here. These resources must be protected and held in trust by the state. There really isn't any kind of Red Hill aquifer, as far as we know. On October 15th, the Navy held a public meeting to kind of share with the public all of the different initiatives and work that they're doing under the AOC. And one of the posters at this particular meeting showed this, talked about the current permit and the permit status. And when we looked at this particular poster, we noticed this letter here from the Department of Health indicating that the Department of Health is going to allow the Navy to continue operating these tanks until it decides on what its permit is. And so that gave us some pause for concern and some cause about what is happening to this particular permit, and has the department actually decided on the application. Now, this letter comes in the heels of closure of a public comment period, where Department of Health accepted comments, including one from the Sierra Club requesting a contested case. Also, too, the deadline for this particular permit is July 15th, 2019, and the letter is dated July 16th. So we're still working to try to tease this all apart. At the Fuel Tank Advisory Committee meeting on October 17, a number of questions came out with respect to the document itself. There was some discussion about discrepancies between what was presented by the Navy and what's in the document itself. Committee members asked some very good questions about concern about the single wall and what this actual Department of Health letter actually meant. There was a lot of discussion there. It was revealed at the time that there's also a 180-day period where applications for permits can actually get approved after the 180-day period if the agency or the department takes no action. And then finally, there was lots of public testimony expressing some concern and low confidence with the approach that the Navy is taking. So that concludes my report. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take questions.
Board, if I could just add a few comments to this. The existence of that July 16th letter that was mailed out just after the day after the deadline for the Department of Health to issue a permit for the Red Hill facility, which is actually embedded in their administrative rules. They set a one-year deadline to issue the permit, and that date was July 15th. Came as a complete surprise until the week of the Fuel Tank Advisory Committee meeting. Prior to that, we've been reaching out formally to the Department of Health inquiring about status of the permit. And also keep in mind too that the Sierra Club had submitted a request for a contested case hearing on the permit. We were interested in finding the status, and Ern was staying in touch with the staff at the Solid and Hazardous Waste Branch on this. And so it came as very much as a surprise. And interesting enough, it was actually revealed by the Navy at their community meeting on Tuesday, and the Fuel Tank Advisory Committee meeting again on Thursday. So there was pretty extensive discussion. And like Ern mentioned, it's very important to note here that there is something in state law that requires agencies to take an action to approve or disapprove a permit application after 180 days. So if the 180-day period passes, permits are deemed approved if no action is taken to disapprove the permits. And basically, from the July 16th letter, it appears that the permit was received or satisfactory around May 23rd. So that would put the date of the 180-day period to end on or about November 19th, which happens to also be the same day of the upcoming public meeting that we just received notice from the EPA and Department of Health that a public meeting will be held to receive comments from the community on the Navy's proposal in their tank upgrade alternative report. So it's interesting to see the comment that is a deadline. What we perceive from the community is a growing concern about this situation at Red Hill. And also, I think they're seeking the Board of Water Supply to be more aggressive in terms of outreach and education to let the community know. So we are kind of at a crossroads, as we were at a crossroads back in 2015 when the AOC was being drafted. We are kind of at that crossroads. The tank upgrade alternative report, recommendation report by the Navy is a critical document. And right now, as you've seen in Erwin's presentation, that it presents option 1A, basically the status quo that is based on the need for the Navy to continue their inspect, patch, and repair process and depend on indirect scanning of the steel plate from the inside out to see how much rust is progressing from the outside of the steel plate in. And what we learned in Erwin's presentations, that the confidence or reliability of that process is not where we would like it to be. It is nowhere near the 99 percentile accuracy. So it is a low confidence. The risk and vulnerability assessment report also points out the high probability of a leak of 1,000 to 30,000 gallons each year, of about 27%. And I think it was 34% for a large leak over a 100-year period from this facility. And ongoing recurring leaks below their level of detection, around 5,800 gallons a year from the total facility. So that is a concern. And unfortunately, it appears that there's strong push toward tank option 1A, and also extending the deadline for performance out to the year 2045. Currently, under the AOC, it puts a deadline at about 2037 or 2038, but under the proposal from the Navy, the recommendation from the Navy to the Health Department and EPA, it's extending it to 2045 for them. We don't know why. We also received word late Friday afternoon that the State Department of Health is proposing some rule changes to the underground storage tank rules, administrative rules. And it so happens that they also have the date of 2045 in their proposed rules. That they also intend to hold a public hearing on their proposed rules, I think on December 2nd. So remember, on the tank upgrade alternative option recommendation report from the Navy, a public meeting on November 19th, and a public meeting or public hearing on a proposed rules by the State Department of Health on December 2nd. Also, both documents cite 2045. At 2045, the Red Hill facility will be about 102 years old. It was built between 1940 and 1943, and come 2045, it will celebrate its 102nd birthday. I'm very concerned about the situation, and we're getting increasing inquiries from the community about this situation and how concerned people are, and inquiries about what is the Board of Water Supply going to be doing. So I just want to kind of let you know that the November and in December, the issues will, I think, rise to the level of greater attention in our community. There's also, to date, we haven't heard of an official response from the Department of Health on their, whether or not they're going to grant the contested case request from the Sierra Club on the permit for the Red Hill facility. So just thought it might be good for you, the board to understand these points. Thank you, that's all I had. We're available for questions.
I hear mention about increasing concerns being brought up. Is there a little bit more specific information with respect to those concerns, like who it's from and how many? I think we need to maybe start tracking those if we not.
That's a good point, Chair. Maybe what we can do is look at an online survey of our customers like we did before, as a method of gauging our customers' concern, level of concern officially with some numbers. We did that in the water rates. I think we did an online survey. I had about 1,000 people respond to our online survey. So excellent idea for that. We don't have any hard numbers, just from people coming up to meet with us, sitting in the meetings, Fuel Tank Advisory Committee meetings, and hearing from them, the testifiers there at the meeting. But I think it's an excellent idea of doing the online survey to get a better feel for what our customers' position is on this issue.
And along those lines, I think maybe you know, in terms of what the Board of Water Supply is doing, what are we doing as an agency? Perhaps it's might be a good idea to take another look at our communication with respect to that respect
Yes.
towards our ratepayers and the public, and let them know what exactly we're doing.
Thank you, Chair. That's a very good point. The two public meetings coming up are actually critical opportunities, and maybe the only opportunity for the community to weigh in and give their manao to the EPA and Department of Health. So the November 19th is actually a very critical time. They only hold one of these a year, and this year there's a major decision that is before the EPA and Department of Health. The administrative rules is also another on December 2nd, another critical opportunity for people to weigh in. Yes.
Well, perhaps along the lines of Chair Andrea's suggestion, maybe we can let people know about these particular dates so concerned individuals can participate.
Excellent idea. Because it's really, the time is short, and we just received by email the public notice today from the Department of Health, but I'm not sure if they're going to put it on the newspaper to give it greater visibility, but we'll look at ways to try to get the word out. It is actually an opportunity, and these decisions before the board, before the Department of Health and the EPA, are decisions that actually have generational implications. The fuel facility at Red Hill is being proposed to be operated for a long time. There's no date where they're going to shut down, but they are contemplating 2045. It really, by 2045, I try to calculate how old I'll be. I may actually be no longer with us. But, you know, for one thing, it will be with my children. And with the children that are still to be born, that will become adults when this issue comes to light in 2045 again. One thing about 2045, it's so far in the future. A lot of the players or people that are on this issue today may no longer be in those positions. And it'll be up to the next generation, our keiki, a younger generation, to stay on top of this important issue. Protection of our water resources is critical to our future. And we see what's happening with climate change, and there is tremendous uncertainty on where that might lead. In face of large uncertainty, we need to err on the side of caution and protection and prevention of contamination of our precious water resources is really the only way we should go, because we don't know where things may lead in the future. So I'll get off my soapbox. Thank you.
Ms. Pahinui?
I just Following up on the communications question that you asked, as you recall, the mayor's, I think it was the SEA, the city report that they do every year, Red Hill actually showed up as a special, and actually the percentage point was a lot higher. It was about 4%, 3-4%. So there is a general awareness. When I go out into the public, when I first started this job over 3 years ago, nobody said Red Hill to me. Now I get it quite a bit. And this is anecdotal, this is not hard numbers, but I get a lot more people asking me, what are we doing about Red Hill? We're seeing the question come up more and more at neighborhood boards, which does fall through. Hawaii Kai is now asking us about what are we going to do? So that message that we've been going out about the water from Honolulu Metro to Hawaii Kai is starting to resonate with people out into Hawaii Kai. Our own consumer survey that we shared with you a couple months ago with Becky Ward showed that Red Hill is starting to show up again. Again, not huge numbers, but the awareness of the issue. And then when we went to the fuel tank, there must have been at least a dozen people that testified, regular community members. 11 had major concerns. So I think when you see it in the newspaper and on Civil Beat, the comments are increasing, the letters to the editor are increasing. It used to be maybe one letter for every article. Now we're getting more like 3 or 4. So the general awareness of it as an issue is increasing. And I think manager's suggestion about doing a survey is an excellent one, and we'd be happy to put together some questions for that for your review. Thank you.
Thank you. Board.
Actually, can I follow up with one thing with Ms. Mahino? Sorry, I waited till you sat down, Kathleen. Along those lines, I think the survey is a great idea. Also, to the degree, I agree with our chair that I think we've been an important source of information and update for the larger community, not just our customers, but anyone who's affected. And so to the degree that we can, if you could also help perhaps providing more information on the upcoming meetings and opportunities for community members to engage, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, and I think we are going to be coming up with some ideas to get that information out because we know how important it is. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, any further questions or discussion on this topic? Okay, hearing none, we are at the end of our regular agenda. I would like to call a recess at this time.